Alright, so hey everyone, today I want to take a look at the dead zones for Call of Duty Warzone 2. I've already covered the first version, but there are a few differences that made sense at, which I'll be covering here, but otherwise this will be very similar to the first video I did. But getting into it, the camera dead zones by default are about 10% and perfectly circular. I think this is a little bigger than the default in the previous version. I think that was about 7%. And acceleration starts very slow, so movement may be difficult to see. But this has full diagonal movement, so if you bob around the vertical axis in this case, you will be moving up and down. This is more obvious when moving around the horizontal axis, where you can see the direction change, passing right over the axis. And movement has a bit smaller default, or a bit bigger, sorry, default dead zone at about 15%. And this is most easy to see with your foot movement. But this too is perfectly circular. And you have full diagonal movement, so if we use this threshold between the board and the wall as this, if I move slightly to the right, I can fall off of it. If I move slightly to the left, I move back towards it. The sprint threshold is the shaded region right here, so there's kind of a small range moving, but if you try sprinting under this region, nothing will happen. If you try sprinting in the shaded region, you'll be allowed to sprint. And if you fall out of this threshold, you stop sprinting. So sprinting, not sprinting, can't sprint, can sprint. Since my last video, they added options for the left stick dead zone, and you can see that it's the same as the right stick. But this is inaccurate to what I just demonstrated. So the value here is 10, and I demonstrated a 15% dead zone. It seems like there is an underlying 5% dead zone, which will be more obvious when looking at the maximum and min, but that's being applied. So there's a really cool tool here that lets you test your stick movement. So unfortunately you can't see the movements within the stick dead zone, but you can just simply lower those and then you will be able to see this. And the stick positions are perfectly accurate, with the minor exception of they've clamped the values under or within 100%, so that's perfectly fine. But that's a really cool tool to see where your sticks actually lean. But to look at the maximums, you can see the camera dead zone is perfectly accurate at 75%. And still retains full diagonal movement. The movement dead zone is a hair larger. It's about 76-77%. And the reason for that is you have the 75% dead zone, and that additional 5% is relative to the remaining range. So 5% of the remaining 25% is very small, so it doesn't make a huge difference to the overall dead zone size. So you still have full diagonal movement, and you can see the sprint threshold has lost that little flat portion around the edge, but it's still largely radial and bound by the angle. Now looking at the minimum, one issue here is you might see it apply as we get lower. Nope. But the menu dead zone is controlled or the menu navigation with the stick is controlled by this left stick maximum. So if your stick leans far enough, you'll have uncontrollable lean. So it's actually very good that they've you can see that happening there. That they've set cap at 5 as the minimum it can go. Otherwise, this would be impossible to control. I was able to center the left stick well enough so that I could stop it from scrolling like that. But ideally, the menu navigation dead zone should be completely separate from these sliders. They should just be set to, 100% and or something very high, so that this can't happen, because that's very dangerous. And if this went to 0, you'd just be unable to edit anything. But looking at the minimum dead zones, acceleration starts very slow, but any movement with the camera or the right stick will create movement. And since the outer dead zone is 5 now, you hit your maximum speed very, very soon. So it's very difficult to control at these values. But movement is actually 5%, and that's that underlying 5% dead zone is being fully expressed here. But you can see that since the outer dead zone is at 5% too, once you move outside of this dead zone, you move at your normal fastest movement speed. The sprint threshold has been scaled wider now too, so that now basically the entire forward region of your stick allows you to sprint, and it's just the angle or the dead zone itself that has you stop. And you can see that that is quite uncontrollable. I'm going to set these back to default and raise this to the maximum to look at the curves. The curves were tested at 0 and 100 max or outer dead zone respectively. So the default curve, I was using linear to attempt to show the dead zones more easily, but the default is standard. And these curves are exactly the same as I showed in the previous video. So standard starts out pretty slow. It's an exponential curve, and then as you move the stick further, you hit your maximum turn speed. Linear was incorrect in the previous video and still incorrect, so this is not a linear curve. This is actually a quadratic curve. So it starts slow too. It starts a little faster than standard, but it still starts slow and then builds up faster at your maximum turn rate. So being quadratic instead of linear means that this curve actually starts out much slower than intended. And so this is quadratic. If you move to say 50%, you're moving at 25% of your total speed. So this is currently a quadratic, but to demonstrate what a linear would look like, I'll counter this curve, and you can see that it started moving faster. So this is what speed you should get with this level of drift. So if I make movements at about 25%, I'm moving at the speed that I was previously at 50%. So this is a linear curve, and see, I'm going to make just 25% circles, demonstrate this, and then switch back to its normal in-game behavior, and you can see it slow down, and make the same circles again, and you can see how much slower that is. So the curve, this linear curve, is incorrect and much slower than it should be for linear. Dynamic is, it says it's a reverse S curve, but this also looks pretty similar to an exponential. It starts about as fast as quadratic, but actually is overall slower than the other curves for further movements, but then it does speed up near the end and hit the same maximum. And spinning around doesn't really help much to show the difference. They're all pretty similar. There are differences you can see in the overlay, but they are pretty closely aligned, so there's not a huge difference between them. The big change here for this version is they added an aim response curve slope scale, and this controls the intensity of the curve. So the default is 1, and that's just all the curves are demonstrated. But if we lower this to 0, so 0 for dynamic actually gets you a quadratic curve. So exactly the same as this game's linear. And this actually applies to all the curves. So if you set it to linear at 0, nothing changed. It's still a quadratic, and spinning isn't really helpful. But and standard is the same. It's still a quadratic at 0. So this slider can range from the quadratic to the normal selected curves. Now, what I think possibly could be happening, it could be that they've set up the curves properly. They set up a linear curve, but it could be that there's an underlying quadratic curve that's just suppressing each of these curves. It could be that dynamic is an actual reverse S-curve implementation, but it being raised to the second power has forced it to be the shape it is, and perhaps with standard this might have been a more shallow curve, but being raised to that has suppress that too. I don't know if that's the case, but that would at least explain why linear is quadratic. But it could just be that they don't want to actually offer linear to players so that they don't accidentally give themselves something more sensitive than they can control. But ideally, at the very least, linear should be changed to be actually linear. Standard and dynamic, there's nothing wrong with these curves, but especially with the response slope scale, this could be made so that at 0 this is actually perfectly linear, and then slide over to whatever the curve type they're actually using. This would give players way more control than it currently does, because this is actually incrementing in very small steps, and this would give players an incredible amount of control, but currently it's just such a small range. Having this with the wider range would give a huge amount of granularity to players controlling their curve. So that's something that would be very useful to see added. But moving on to the sensitivities. So speaking a bit on the advanced sensitivity, you have to go up to the custom to be able to access the slider. And for the most part, so the default value of 1.2 is actually the same speed as setting this to 4, and the maximum of 4 is the same as 20. Same. So for the most part, these sliders are identical. It's mainly in the lower values. I'm not sure when the differences change, but a value of 0.1 is much slower than the 1 for the basic value. So the only reason you really use the advanced version is if you want slower sensitivities than what's offered here, or if you want extra granularity in this option. So there are more steps than the 1 through 20. There's more steps here. Otherwise, there's really no reason to use it. The range for the slider, at least for the basic version, at 1, horizontally at least, you turn at about 240 degrees per second. That's what that looks like. The default is 400 and some degrees per second. And the maximum is 1600 degrees per second. This is extraordinarily fast. So there's a huge range, sensitivity range you have access to. But one of the issues is that the vertical sensitivity slider is not equal to the horizontal sensitivity slider. So if you set them the same, the vertical sensitivity is actually much slower than the horizontal. So 4 and 4 right here, we have the horizontal sensitivity, and then we have the vertical sensitivity. And this is pretty obviously slower. The tests for vertical sensitivity are pretty inaccurate, but just an approximate estimate is that the vertical sensitivity is about 35-36% of the horizontal, and that makes it so your vertical sensitivity is of course slower, but this also changes your diagonal movement, where your diagonal movement is actually biased towards the more sensitive axis. To give a clear demonstration of that, we'll just go put them like this, and you can see that I can point very vertically and it's still horizontally biased is where the cursor is actually moving. So that can be an issue there if you want them to be even. And but what's even more interesting is so in hipfire, the vertical sensitivity is about 35%. Or sorry, the vertical sensitivity is about 35% of the horizontal. But when you're aiming down sights, the vertical sensitivity is about 65% of the horizontal. And so this is quite a bit closer. The big issue here is that means that if you want to make, you can't make both the ADS and the hipfire have even axis sensitivities. One is always going to be incorrect. For example, if you want to play at the highest sensitivity you can in hipfire, 5 or 6 is approximately even to 20 vertical sensitivity. So if you say look left or right, it's about the same speed as up or down. But when you aim down sights, you can see that because the sensitivities were more even in ADS, doing this actually makes the vertical sensitivity quite a bit faster, and that should be pretty obvious here. So this is vertical, and again horizontal. And the vertical sensitivity in this case is almost twice as fast. It's about 1 times faster than the horizontal. So while hipfire is mostly even at these values, the ADS is much faster vertically. So there's really no way to deal with that properly. I've made a tool that approximates, at least with these basic sensitivity values, the ratio between the slider ranges, so you can customize the horizontal and vertical sensitivities and see where that matches, so that you can align both the hipfire and ADS ratios to what you want. Again, the vertical tests aren't perfectly accurate, so just take this tool with a grain of salt, but you can mess with that in the description to try to get the values you want. And that will offer an option to control the slider, the ADS sensitivity multiplier. By default, the default of 1 actually slows your sensitivity by or multiplies your sensitivity by 25%, or so this is your default hipfire, and then when you aim down sights, you're moving at 25% of that. When you max this out to 4.0, this actually makes this almost even. So when I tested it, it was about 96%. It's a little interesting that it's not perfectly 100%. But if you want your ADS to be the same as your hipfire, you can basically max that out. At minimum, at 0.1, your ADS sensitivity is about 2.5% of your hipfire. So you do have a huge range to work with this slider. The last thing I want to, or not the last thing, but the next thing is there is aim smoothing in this game. And for those unaware, aim smoothing causes your turn speed to build up over time. So you might select a value on the curve that, say has you go 400 degrees per second. But because of smoothing, you won't start at that speed. You'll start at a lower speed, and then it'll build up over some time, normally a fraction of a second to a second. And Call of Duty's duration is quite quick, but smoothing can make movements feel more sluggish. So if I make quick movements, you can see that not much is happening. But if I hold, you can see that the turn speed is actually quite fast. So it's building up to that speed over a short period of time. But while smoothing is active, your turn speed is in flux, and this can make turning or aiming feel more sluggish or slower or inconsistent than it should. This implementation, it seems like there's probably less smoothing when you're aiming down sights, and in hipfire it seems like smoothing might be only applied or more heavily applied to the horizontal axis. And for example, if I did what I did before to try to make the axis sensitivities even, so this speed right here is about the same as this speed in the tests. But initially, you can see that if I move left or right, very little is happening. But if I move up or down, you can see that it's far more sensitive. And this can make it so that your immediate movements feel vertically biased, even if the sensitivities when smoothing is finally over are the same. So this can make movements feel irregular. Even if your sensitivity is the same right here, it can feel vertically biased despite that. So I think for this, I think for consistency, both the vertical and horizontal axis should probably have smoothing applied evenly to them, but definitely an option to disable smoothing should be added so that players can access the values they want instantly. This would remove any bit of sluggishness or inconsistency with their controls. There is aim assist in this game, and there are much better videos. I'm kind of like stuck in this area to demonstrate this. The biggest two types of aim assist are slowdown and tracking, and you can see how big the window is for this. So like you can see from here to about here is where the window is. So there's a quite big window and a very notable sensitivity drop. But there are better videos out there demonstrating the aim assist as well as the different types. So that about covers things. To sum up everything I've talked about, the first thing could be improved is to make the menu navigation Deadzone completely separate from these options, so that if you, for whatever reason, lowered the left stick maximum to 5, that wouldn't affect your cursor navigation at all. The other thing would be to make the curves scale with the outer Deadzone. Again, this isn't a huge issue because most players are going to be using either default or very high values, so this acceleration jump won't be noticeable. But since Call of Duty doesn't formally use acceleration jumps like games like Halo or Borderlands, it would be good to see this properly scaled just to avoid that. The curves should be made accurate, so at the very least linear should be made linear, so that that would be accurate. But this slider range should make it so that you can have a range from the curve to a linear curve, and this will give you far more control over what curves you want to use. The vertical sensitivities should be made the same so that when they're set the same, they are the same. And these should apply to the ADS. The ADS should just be a slowdown, and whatever vertical horizontal ratio should be consistent between this. So if it's 4:4 for the hipfire, it should be 4:4 for the ADS. And lastly, there should be an option to control the aim smoothing, a slider or at least or a toggle, so that you can disable it or customize the amount of smoothing you get, so that you can fully remove that. But that about covers it. So yeah, thanks for watching, and everyone have a good rest of your day.